Hello, friends. This is Christopher Davis-Shannon, and today I am checking in with the guitarist and band leader from across the country, Jonathan Stout. Jonathan, how are you doing today?
We're holding up nicely, staying at home. I just baked a loaf of hybrid sourdough plus yeast bread.
Yeah, I have to tell you from your Facebook, I'm starting to begin to think that you only subsist on bread and very fancy cocktails.
There are fillings inside the bread in the sandwiches.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm just checking on your health. That's all.
Oh no, we're doing good. We're lucky in California, especially in Southern California and Pasadena where we live. We have citrus trees that aren't even on our property. They just hang over into our backyard, and it's like when life gives you lemons, you make a bunch of fancy cocktails.
Yes, that's exactly how that phrase goes. Well, Jonathan, would you mind kicking us off with a tune?
Yeah, sure, man. Here's a little bit of Tea for Two.
That's a fine picking right there, Jonathan.
That's some sands warming up action. So
Yeah.
For a second there, I was worried we were going to the seafood buffet with how many clams I was serving up. So.
I don't think anyone will notice. Don't worry. For those listening out there, this might actually be a guitar style that you're not too accustomed to. Jonathan's playing in an old chord melody style, and I'm actually curious what first got you into this.
Well, so the funny thing is, I spend 90% of my musical life being a swing dance band leader. Like I'm a Lindy Hopper for over 20 years. And when I started swing dancing, it was the height of the swing revival. And there was a core group of people in Los Angeles that was not satisfied with sort of the big bad voodoo daddy version of swing and the swing dancing that went along with it. And was like, it's not enough to just buy a pair of spectator shoes and clip-on suspenders and like throw somebody around. Like they actually really wanted to get into it. And it's funny because like as a 90s kid, it's a very punk rock, alternative rock idea of like, no man, we need to get to the real thing. It's like such a hipster thing of like, oh no, that's not the best pizza in Brooklyn. This is the best pizza in Brooklyn. And like, I've been like that since like 1992, and I've actually probably been like that earlier because my mother was born and raised in Naples, Italy. She met my dad, who was an American sailor in her early 20s, and so like there's something about Italians, and Neapolitans, of course, are even more specifically like this, that the only thing that is valid is the Italian form. Or like, if the other forms are valid, then the Italian one is just better. Oh, Italian fashion? Like, that's so much better than French fashion, please. Oh,
as a side. On the men's side, it's true though.
yeah, I mean, sometimes it is. I mean, if you want to argue that a Ferrari is better than a Porsche, I mean,
Yeah.
okay, but it's definitely better than a Triumph or some British car, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, so she just kind of raised me like, that's the way. And she's a couturier, so like, she's a fashion designer, and you know, on a very small scale, just sort of like private clients. And I was just sort of raised with that mentality. So when it came to swing dancing, it's like, no, I got to do the right thing with cocktails. You mentioned my Facebook and Instagram, like, no, I don't want just stuff thrown in a glass. Like, you're going to measure that, and it's going to be this specific rye whiskey because that's the good one, or whatever. So yeah, like, I just kind of got into this really hardcore, really specific kind of swing dancing, where it was like, no, we want to watch old clips and actually get the steps right, and not just learn them from some dance teacher at a random dance studio that spends most of his life doing tango. And so that kind of carried through to the music, because that culture was like, all right, no, you got to dress in vintage clothing 24/7. You got to watch the old clips. You got to watch old movies. You got to listen to old music. And the kind of like jump blues, hybrid rock and roll stuff was like not good enough. And I remember the teacher that I had was like, you can't do a routine to Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, but the closest I'll let you get is, here's this band from Chicago, the Mighty Blue Kings. And they were like a really good sounding jump blues band. And she's like, that's close enough. And so we had this gestation period where like the best we could get was like a really good jump blues band. And then like all the swing bands were like so bebop out that like, there was the rhythmically, it just didn't feel right. It's like, it's like if somebody said, hey, we're going to go to an oldies concert, and you're like, oh, cool. Like Buddy Holly, maybe some Motown. You're like, no, Led Zeppelin. You're
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
that's still rock and roll. I get it, but that doesn't feel the same. And like, if you, if it's like, I want to see Eddie Cochran do Summertime Blues. I don't want to see the Who do Summertime Blues. Or if you want to see the Who do Summertime Blues, be like, yeah, that's the Who doing it as this huge rock thing, as opposed to like a real original rockabilly.
Yeah.
So it's that same idea. And basically, I was playing guitar. I started in high school with that dancing stuff, and I'd been playing guitar. And I'm going to tell you something. Learning Metallica solos did not actually get me the chicks that I thought that I was like. I was like, this
It never
does.
does.
I was like, this is gonna be so cool. Like, I'm an awkward teenager, and I'd like to, like, you know, be a hit with the ladies. And oh, you mean learning Fade to Black note for note doesn't do it? And it does not, or didn't at the time. So I started swing dancing, and that kind of got me into jazz very generically. I did the kind of Jazz 101 by Kind of Blue, by Giant Steps, by stuff like that. And it got me into kind of like 50s, 60s jazz. And I started playing that on guitar. And when I went to college in 1999, I had this very interesting moment, or at least interesting to me. Maybe you've turned it off by now. But I basically like started, I went to a college that happened to have a very good studio jazz guitar major. And I was like, oh, I'll do a double major with my regular degree, and I'll go to the jazz guitar school. And that was a horrible idea, but it worked out in the end. It was actually kind of the smooth jazz guitar program. And it
as many university programs are, the bop, post-bop, smooth jazz programs that are I would in the U.S. educational system.
I would have been grateful for a post-bop school. I was literally straight to like Kenny G land, with no bebop before.
Sounds like a certain circle of hell that you were stuck in for a while.
Yeah, I don't know what I did to deserve it, but the funny thing is, there were a couple of things that I got out of it. One of which was a D in a 2-unit guitar class, because I couldn't learn a Charlie Christian solo properly. The irony
Which
of
are
that.
the most important solos. That's fair to say.
You know, my entire existence, like on an electric guitar, is based on Charlie Christian now, and I named my son Charlie on behalf of Charlie Christian. He's my hero.
I named my cat Charlie on behalf of Charlie Christian.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's clearly the same thing. Naming a child who has to grow up and live with the name the
Well, at least he'll have a good.
kidding.
He'll have a good story. Yeah.
Well, anyway,
Your son will
but
always
like,
have a good story behind it.
yeah. I mean, he thankfully he can always change it too, because there's any number of Charlies he can pretend he's named after if he wants to be. But no, the funny thing with his name is he's named Charles Frederick Stout, and that's after Charlie, Christian, and Freddie Green. He was very nearly Charlie Allen Stout, but Frederick was sort of a family name that we wanted to keep. And so,
Alan Roos, I assume.
Exactly. And but so we decided that that's perfect, because he can be Charles, he can be Charlie, he can be Chuck, he can be Chaz, he could be Fred, he could be Freddie, he could be Rick. Technically, he could also be he could be famous mystery writer C. Frederick Stout. He could be Holy Roman Emperor Charles Frederick I. You know, he's got a lot of options.
I like that last option. I think that might be worth pursuing.
I've only told that particular story like 10 million times, so you can see how the shtick is pretty well.
Yeah.
But no, so like I basically went to jazz school and found it really unfulfilling, and I didn't get what I wanted out of it, and it made me hate playing guitar. And at the same time, like I basically found this group of swing dancers at college, one of which is a dear friend, and he's been world Lindy Hop champion, and he still makes his living as a traveling Lindy Hop instructor, one of the top in the world, and Nick Williams. And basically like I saw them doing Charleston over in a corner because Save Ferris played our like orientation dance or whatever. And they had like one fake swing song, and I saw people dancing and I made friends with them. So as my interest in guitar completely died over the course of this year, my interest in swing dancing took over, and I was dancing 7 nights a week with carpooling with my friend. I met the woman who would become my wife swing dancing, and we were dancing together all the time and competing and doing all that kind of stuff. And then basically like I quit guitar at the end of that year, quit that program, had like 2 weeks of not being a guitar player anymore where I was done with it. And then I saw the movie Sweet and Lowdown. And yeah, and Howard Alden played the soundtrack. Bucky Pizzarelli, who we just lost, played rhythm guitar on it. And it's this Woody Allen movie about this fictional 1930s American guitar player who is the kind of, oh, hey, can we swear?
Of course.
Okay, cool. He's the kind of like total asshole that would say, I'm the best guitar player in the world, but then has the creeping self-doubt to follow it up with, well, there's this gypsy in France, but I'm the second best guitar player. So, I mean, like, what a great character, and just deeply, deeply flawed and awful. But that music was so, I was like, oh, duh, I play jazz guitar, and I swing dance all the time. I need to put the peanut butter and the chocolate together, and that will make so much better sense. And I basically spent 2 years, I got a lesson from, my uncle's a trombone player, and he had been playing all over Los Angeles, arranged, played on all sorts of hit records and stuff. And throughout my guitar development, for my birthday, I would sometimes he would give me a lesson with somebody that was doing some interesting guitar style that I was interested. So when I was into U2 and The Cure, it was like, here's a guy that works with a bunch of delay pedals. And that was very fascinating. And then when I started trying to be a bebopper, he got me a lesson with a bebop guy. That was a very fruitless lesson, unfortunately, because I didn't understand how to learn in that modality yet. And but what was really like just amazingly Monkey Meet the Monolith kind of thing was I got this lesson with a guy named John Reynolds. And John Reynolds is like, he's one of those people that grew up in the 60s, and instead of being a hippie, he kind of went back in time, kind of like the R. Crumb and the Cheap Suit Serenaders crowd.
Yeah.
And so you probably know Casey McGill, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay, so Casey McGill and him had a band in the 80s called Mood Indigo, and as a 3-piece, and they would, they were like the talk of Hollywood, and they played for people like Bing Crosby and Fred Astaire, and in their later years. So I got this lesson with John Reynolds, and he's somebody that comes from, he learned guitar and plectrum banjo from George M. Smith, who was a studio guitar player in the 30s. He wrote the George M. Smith guitar method, which apparently Alan Roos used to teach his students, along with the Van Epps method. He also wrote the piece, there's a book called Masters of Plectrum Guitar by Mel Bay. It's got a lot of this chord melody stuff in it. And he wrote a couple of pieces in it. One's a test pilot, which something like that. I've forgotten it. I sort of stole it for a piece I just wrote. I stole a little bit of it, a little homage to it. And now I can't remember how the song actually goes. I just remember my bastardization of it. But I go to John Reynolds' house, and he's watching the Marx Brothers. Like he's like a 1930s cartoon character that's completely insane, kind of like a pre-comics code, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit kind of insanity. And he's an animator by trade, even on top of being a guitar player. And so he comes in with this, like, I open the door not realizing it's going to be him. And I knew him from dance bands that he played in Los Angeles. He opens the door and he's like, just wild. I'm like, hold on a second, man. And he's like watching the Marx Brothers movie, A Day at the Races, to relearn the tune, All God's Children Got Rhythm. And that's like one of the most famous Lindy Hop scenes in film. And it was just like this peanut butter chocolate moment coming together. And then I took a lesson with him, and it wasn't so much that he showed me specific techniques, but I just kind of stole what he played, and we kind of went back and forth with me kind of trying to copy the stuff that he did, and it was just so mind-bendy and beautiful. And after that, I basically spent 2 years in my dorm room, like trying to learn everything I could about swing guitar, and that was Django at first mostly, and then this was kind of the golden age of LimeWire and Audio Galaxy and Napster, where you could basically download music for free illegally. And I basically like downloaded everything I could. Coleman Hawkins, find everything that there is, all this. And there was this great website called classicjazzguitar.com, which has long since fallen off the internet. And it had real audio links. And somebody, I don't even know who, had like taken all of these amazing 30s and 40s guitar players and put up little real audio clips of their cameo solos in songs. So like Eddie Lang's solo on this song, Barney Kessel's solo on this song, Carmen Mastrin, Irving Ashby, Al Casey, all these cats, Alan Roos being one of the main ones. And so rather than having to sort through 20 different records that Alan Roos is on to find a solo, you just show up and click the real audio and you hear and all that stuff. And so one of the tunes was Stuffy. That's a 1945 session that Coleman Hawkins led, and Alan Roos gets like the last bridge of the song, and it's a little riff tune. And so like over that 2 years, I tried to learn everything I could, started learning about this chord style, and thought that was really cool. And inadvertently, several of those songs that happened to have those cameo solos from that website ended up being the original repertoire of my band, the Campus Five. And so when our drummer, who was also a swing dancer as well, basically about 6 months before we started a band, he started a band. He had started playing with one of the better big bands in town, and for vintage stuff, that is. And he thought, I'll start a band too. That'll be fun. Like, we'll have more bands to play in. Of course, I got him fired from the other band for having the audacity to like do anything else, but which was silly. But I basically played as John Reynolds' sub in my drummer's band for 6 months. And it was like the 2 years before that versus the 6 months, it was like taking a piece of bread that had been proofing in a cold refrigerator and then putting it out at room temperature, and all of a sudden the yeast goes whoa, and it just starts like rising dramatically. And like the gains that I was making in my playing and understanding in that 6 months of playing with people was huge. And then my singer and I decided, well, this having one more good swing band is great, let's have another good swing band. And so we decided to start a swing band that was like the real thing, the authentic, the real deal, the that kind of thing, but it was specifically tailored for swing dancers with those tempos and those song choices in mind. So like, it's been 18 years of band leading, and I've still not played In the Mood.
Hey, that's a beautiful thing.
I mean, the thing is, like, that's a great arrangement. It's a great song, but like, it's so played out. And to our people, that's just like the most dumb, obvious thing. And it actually took me 13 years before I got around to playing Sing, Sing, Sing.
Oh yeah, but that's a photo. See, In the Mood always gets me. I get requests for that a lot, but my band, we're usually a trio, quartet tops. I'm like, In the Mood just doesn't work if you don't have a big band. Like, that lush arrangement is so much of it. Like, you don't want a violin just playing the heads of that. It's not the same. They want
really,
Glenn Miller.
It really isn't. And for I have, at this point, I have 7 different bands. I'm not like you're.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's as crazy as you might think, because I'm getting close to the same boat. It's like you can't have the same band doing everything, and you need the right personnel available to you. It's tough.
Well, and I'm lucky that like I have charts. I have sheet music for everything that I have created over these years. At least for the small bands, I've created all of it. And even if I didn't transcribe something myself, I've recopied it and rearranged it. And basically, like, I have a 7-piece band, so that's 2 horns, 4 rhythm, on our singer, and we co-own the band. And then we got a request to do a big band, so I put a big band together, so that's 14. And then one of the bands, the band that John Reynolds was in, this guy named Dean Mora, Mora's Modern Rhythmists, that was our archetype for what a real deal band was. But his joke was that he stopped at 1936 or 1937, so he wouldn't have to play Sing, Sing, Sing. And my thing was like, that's perfect. We'll start at 1937 to play all the material that he doesn't. And so he made a kind of famous thing where he was going to disband his band Mora's Modern Rhythmists. Now, what we didn't really know is he was just getting rid of that name and rebranding everything the Dean Mora Orchestra so that he could do kind of everything so he could get more work. But we really felt a need for that specific band and that specific style of pre-swing big band music. So then we started a band called the Rhythm Busters, and then we were playing an event that was 3 days, and they're like, we want you to play all 3 nights, but we can't have the same band 2 nights in a row. Okay, well, I've got a big band and a 10-piece band. We can't afford that. Okay. How about I put together, you know what my favorite thing is? The Benny Goodman Sextet. I'll put together a band where I swap out the 2 horn players for a dedicated clarinet player and a vibraphonist. So then I started that. Then the next year they're like, we need a 3rd night. I'm like, oh crap. Okay, how about I put together a Django band, but it'll have drums and it'll be really tailored for dancing in a way that most jazz manouche bands aren't. And that worked. And then it was like, oh, we really like your 7-piece band, but we can't afford your 11-piece band or your 14-piece band. But, and we need you to play a dance contest where every song is like 15 minutes and the solos have to keep going the whole time. And that's going to kill 2 horn players. So can you do 4 horn players? Okay. All right. So now I've got a 9-piece band. And then, oh, we can't afford any of your bands. Is there any way you could do a quartet? Okay. So I've got all those bands, which is crazy. But basically, like, that chord melody stuff to answer your original question from 5.5 hours ago. Basically, like, that website had all these clips, and it was fascinating to see all these different guitar players excerpted, which is really valuable, because if you have to wait for the whole tune, you can sometimes like lose your attention.
Yeah, and we should note that back then, guitar solos weren't necessarily what they were today. The guitar players weren't taking 5-6 choruses of a tune. They're like getting a B section of a tune most of the time when it's the chord melody stuff. So hunting those down is tough in those tunes if you're dropping a needle on a record.
Or even just like even forget like the second half, like the B section of a tune, like, you know, you get a bridge, maybe you don't even get a bridge, maybe you get a 4-bar key change interlude, and then that's it, or you get a 4-bar intro. And also hunting him down because, okay, well, he's on these Lionel Hampton sessions, but not on those Lionel Hampton All-Star sessions. Well, he's got solos on these 3 Benny Goodman tunes, but are they all on the same CD? And, you know, and on and on. And so a bunch of the tunes that happened to be on that website made our initial repertoire. And so because I was basically like, the best way to be authentic is to just reproduce this as directly and exactly as possible, all of our arrangements were like, the solos were in identical order to the record as best I could. It's funny, I go back and I see how many mistakes I made or how many lazy things I was like, oh, that's not actually how that song ends. And like 7 Come 11 we do, and the real ending is does one of those, and like I didn't even catch that, so I was like, or something like that, which is like totally fake and made up. And I was like, man, that was lazy. And Benny's Bugle we play, and that, like, I didn't even get the out riff right, because the out riff as it is makes me think there's an extra beat in the song. And it's like really hard. And I actually play it in other bands sometimes as a guest where they have it right. And I'm like, nope, still sounds wrong to me, but I know it's right.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to throw a link in the description of this here to a bunch of the Benny Goodman Sextet recordings, because for anyone not familiar with them, they should be. It's just some of the best records that were made, especially like bridging the big band and like early trad era. You know, there's some really hip stuff going on in there, especially Charlie Christian's guitar work. You know, it's way ahead of its time in those solos.
I think it's really the ideal small group swing band because things are arranged so that they have structure and an arc and some kind of form, but they're still open, that they really breathe. And that's kind of the best small group swing. But yeah, so the chord melody stuff just came from, I need to figure out how I can play the bridge to Stuffy or you know, some of these other songs that had Alan Roos guitar solos in them. And then my trumpet player came along and made a little 2-horn reduction of the Harry James I'm Beginning to See the Light, and it's got this Alan Roos guitar intro. Now, the funny thing is that's what he wrote. The note order of those arpeggiated things is actually slightly different, and I've never gone back to learn it properly. But that idea of like, okay, I've got this form. And like, okay, that was like the start that I got, and that really helped me along. Now, the other thing, I keep mentioning Charlie Christian, and I've been giving a lot of lessons over Zoom lately, and I keep mentioning that to the people that are interested in chord melody. And at first, I think they're kind of like, why are you talking about single note soloing? But also at the time that there was this classicjazzguitar.com, there was a website that a guy named Gary Hansen put up, this Canadian dude who I'm now friends with. And he had done all these Charlie Christian transcriptions, and he, more than that, had done little lessons showing the geometric way that Charlie played, so that when he has a dominant 7th chord, he's typically going to play, like, if you think of like a B flat 7 at the 6th fret, he's going to play a box pattern that's based around that chord shape. And then the next chord, let's say in like Rose Room, is an E flat 7, and it's going to be based around this E flat 9 or E flat 13 box. And that basically he would play things in those little boxes around those chord shapes as the anchor, and then resolve to the A natural or the A flat 6 on this kind of shape at the 4th fret. But like, that's what I do with chord melody. So instead of, it's, and so because of the way that website taught me to think with geometric patterns, that's exactly how I think with chord shapes. And I basically like spent 10 years in the band running with it, just kind of, you know, with my own kind of guessing and stuff. And then only after that did I find some like better resources of like more accurate transcriptions. And then it was about maybe 12, 13 years into the band that I finally got a vintage guitar. And believe it or not, like the motivation that provided me, it was like a total placebo effect, where it wasn't the guitar being better that made me play better, but it inspired me to like, no, I better get this shit right. Like,
if you're gonna have the right tool to do it with, you might as well do it right.
Yeah. And I was like, no, man, I got to start doing this. And I goofed around with some playing solo with this chord melody stuff occasionally. And my friend Don Lee, Don is like the coolest person. There's a comedian, Jonah Ray, that has this bit about how TJ Maxx shouldn't be the name of the store. It should be the name of like the coolest person that we all went to high school with. Oh, dude, do you remember that time TJ Maxx did this thing, kind of like a Ferris Bueller idea? And he spins the bit out like, oh man, that's so cool. Like, man, that guy's so much better than Ross, you know? Anyway, but like Don Lee is like this living Ferris Bueller kind of character, and he's a dear friend, and he's one of the people that we started swing dancing with in our little cohort in high school. And he's now like a world famous cocktail bartender, and he got me into cocktails, and he's like the best kind of nerd in the whole world, where he's like, oh, I want to make a Muppet for a project. And then he like literally goes to the exact distributor that makes the felt that you make Muppets out of. And like, you know, like it just really does it.
Hey man, if you're gonna do it right. That's all.
Yeah. And I try and embody that thing. And he caught me just kind of randomly going on Facebook Live for fun when that first started. And I said, yeah, there's something about practicing with an audience that's really helpful, because when you're by yourself, you can start and stop. And part of the skill of doing chord melody stuff where you're solo especially is it's just got to keep going. You can't start and stop.
Yeah. And that's a lot tougher to say than to actually accomplish on the instrument.
Yeah. Well, but having an audience really, really helps, because you're so much more accountable, because they're listening to you. And sure, it's scary as heck when you like mess up and you're like, wait, what chord was I playing? Because my muscle memory has failed me for a second. And you're like, oh crap,
Yep.
what do we do? And then finally you just have to like knuckle through and be like, all right, well, I can't play the melody I was literally playing and the little set piece. Now I just have to riff on the changes until I can kind of get my bearings. And, you know, doing that. And he basically told me, he's like, I really enjoyed that. And I said, yeah, but I want to put these videos up and have them be perfect. Cause I think I'd started putting up some YouTube videos, and it would take me like 80 takes or something ridiculous to like really get it.
Yeah.
And part of it was that I was writing the arrangement, and as soon as it was written, I was trying to play it, as opposed to like perfecting it and then recording it. And then, you know, he basically said, go do the live thing, because it's authentic and people really connect with that more than they do like a standard video where it's just like, could be take 80, doesn't matter.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said for imperfection in your playing when people see it, because there's so much of the online content that I put out and you put out and everyone puts out is, you know, as you said, the 80th take. We've shed it so much and everything needs to be just perfect. But then you go see a gig and shit ain't perfect.
Yeah.
But that's also part of the joy of music, right? I mean, those clams, those mistakes, as long as you don't lose the form or the time, I mean, nothing's really insurmountable. And that's sort of the charm of the music is the imperfections in there as well.
Yeah. I mean, like wabi sabi, man, that's like such a, you know, thing of like the Japanese idea that when you have a handmade thing, that the beauty is not in getting it perfect, but the beauty is in the personalized imperfections. I mean, you don't want it to fall apart, but you like a little nick here or there in a handmade object, is that's the thing that tells you it was made by hand and not made by a machine. I mean, the flip side of that is like, but when you do put out a record, like there are certain things that you can live with live that everyone in the moment was like, oh, that was amazing. And then you hear it back and you're like, yeah, but you remove that atmosphere that we were all breathing and it's gone. And so, you know, like that 80th take sometimes is even hard to get right and sound good, even when it is perfect. But doing that live thing, it really, like the idea of like, okay, I've started to make these little chord melody arrangements. I need to be able to keep playing them and really do them and do them and do them. And so I did that for a couple of years before I could like have enough to even do a gig really. But it was amazing because solo in a band, which I think is a different thing than arranging a melody in a chord melody style. I honestly, it was a lot of just flailing around and going up and down the scale and up and down the scale.
And inversions and inversions and inversions.
Yeah, and I was doing the same. I mean, like I can't tell you how many songs we had in F where the bridge goes to A7, like a cycle
of
around.
Course. Yeah.
And it was like the same solo on the same gig, the same solo twice.
Yeah.
And that got to be frustrating. And so I was starting to do these chord melody arrangements and of the melodies. And it was amazing how harmonic, melodic relationships started to unfold in ways that in my single note playing I never had, because I'm a guitar player in a swing band. I don't get to play the melody that often. And if I do, it's usually some kind of riff. And a riff is not necessarily melodic like a melody to a song. And there's certain things that come from like Louis Armstrong and that are about certain notes melodically that are just diatonic notes in a scale that when you're playing through like changes where like you really have to like, you know, to make an Eddie Lang, Lonnie Johnson joke, you have to change keys to play those blues. And like, you know, when you play something like A flat walking down to F7, like a 1 walking down to a 6, it's like you can't still keep playing A flat over that F.
Right.
There's an A natural in it. But the thing is, you look at like the great jazz soloists and the great melodies songs, no one ever plays A flat that now goes up to an A natural in the melody to a song. That never happens. You know what happens? Or it's that same note. And
Right.
It's like, okay, that's a G over the F7. It's the major 7th of the key. It's the 9th of that chord. That happens all the time. And either it does this or it does, where it resolves down to that. And going, oh, that's the melody to this. Oh, yeah, I know that. There it is again. I mean, now I'm in G instead of A flat, but like,
right.
And like, so now all of a sudden I'm starting to understand what the pretty notes are and what the kind of money notes are over melodies, and realizing that like in a major key, it's this major pentatonic plus the 7th that really, that's where all the money notes are. And realizing that on top of these kind of like kind of full bar chord positions, that's all the notes that I would be getting anyway. I was like, oh, perfect. But yeah, and there's certain, from doing that, there's also certain chords that I go, oh yeah, you know, the target note that you really want to hit is not the one you think. It's not the arpeggio. It's not one of the notes that are in like the triad or even the 7th. It's like the 9th or something. So, or the 13th. So like on Manhattan, it goes to a 1 to a dominant 2 chord. Like that's the note. And yeah, so all these things sort of developed when I started learning how to hang the melody to a real song. It's like a real melody over the chords and seeing, oh, okay, that's what it's doing.
Yeah. I did a very similar thing where I started doing chord melody both on uke and guitar. It's, you know, rearranging heads in that style. And it is kind of odd just to see how things get laid out, because you're forced to think of the harmonic relationship of the melody of the chords the entire time. Where standard guitar playing, you know, you're thinking of the chords certainly, but when you're doing single note lines, the melody is so much more important. And in this style, you kind of, they have such a more symbiotic relationship with each other that informs the harmony of the entire tune. And you know, those old, you said the Eddie Lang and Lonnie Johnson recordings for way back, like there's so much cool stuff going on in there that is not necessarily something that if you just sat down to arrange a tune that you would think of logically to do, but then when you listen back and you reverse engineer and see what they were doing, it makes total sense why those notes work there. But it's not what we think of in general soloing practice in single note lines necessarily. So you're forced to think almost more inside a box to some degree with the chord melody stuff than you are with the single note lines. But sometimes I think that can be beneficial because you're forced to push the harmony a little bit more in the tension and release in the style of playing.
Yeah, the challenge, one of the challenges that I find is like, how much of the chord do I need to have in the bottom part so that you hear the chord change? Or like when one chord, like man, a 1 to a 6 chord, like that change just dun, dun, dun. Like those are exactly the same notes in an E flat 6 and a C minor 7. And right. I was just doing this today or the last couple of days. I started doing Count Basie's Jive at 5. Technically that should be da da da, like the root should change, but I'm like, I can't really reach and like kind of get away with it. Does your ear do the work? And so, yeah, I'm starting to realize there are times where the ear is totally doing the work and I don't need to stress it. And then other times where I'm like, yeah, I got to try harder.
Right. You do have to dictate the harmony a little bit more sometimes. And sometimes you can sit there and pedal a bass note while you have a moving melodic line over top, and we figure it out.
Yeah.
Just kind of magical. That our ears able to do that. You know, even with like bass instruments, with the harmonic series, how we put together the fundamentals of notes that we can't hear. It's a magical thing what the human brain does in relation to music.
Yeah, I mean the puzzle completing nature of the brain is really fascinating. And just because you got me on brain thinking, I heard this thing about what makes one of the kind of theories or insights as to what makes jazz specifically, or at least improvised music, and thus jazz would be a thing, is what makes it hit your brain and activate. And part of it is the combination of things that are expected, but then adding things that are not expected. And so somebody like Lester Young is the number one cat for that, because every time I try and sing along with a Lester Young solo that I don't know yet, I find myself completing his sentences in my head with the dumb, obvious thing. And what does he do? He does something slightly more clever or something slightly displaced. And so you get kind of like the beginning of a phrase that you would be like, oh, I can just do this on autocomplete. And then you're like, oh, not so fast. and yeah, and like there is something to the fact that my brain was auto-completing what I think the rest of the riff would be like. Like I've heard that phrase, and so if somebody goes, you're like, whoa, that's not where I thought it was going to end up, you know. And I just been trying to create a ton of content lately, obviously, because we're all sheltered in place and whatnot. And there's a great ballroom in Baltimore, Maryland called Mobtown Ballroom, and they were doing sort of a fundraiser telethon. I think I did 24 hours on YouTube Live, and man, it got weird. Butch is actually totally exactly on point for Mobtown. That's totally on brand for them. But I wrote this little riff tune and kind of did a multi-track recording of it. But there's something about and so like the idea that it goes up, then it goes down. But the thing that was sort of weird is I did I got to put a pineapple chord in there, and that like, whoa, okay. Even though the melody note being like a blues third was not that clever, but like changing the chord, it was like familiar, but then, oh, that's clever. By the way, have you ever heard that terminology, pineapple chord?
No, you're going to have to explain that one to me.
Okay.
Is this a West Coast slang term?
No, well, I don't think so. So I got it from my friend Bob Perrins, who's a great resonator, mostly guitar player. He played with the Hot Sardines, I believe, in New York. Okay. He's been living out here in Los Angeles for quite a while now. And he's, you know, steeped in Django and Eddie Lang, and he just loves harmony. And we do a duo gig sometimes where we just sit there and nerd out about what melody note is, or yeah, that's not really a this chord, it's really a that chord with this extension, and yes. that kind of thing. And he introduced me to it, and I think what he said is, I think there's a song, Pineapple Rag, and it has this like where you're constantly hitting the flat 6 dominant. So like an F, it'd be D flat 7. And so it's so much easier than saying flat 6 dominant. You can just say, because if you're yelling chords to somebody on a gig.
Of course, yeah.
You know, 6, well, did you hear the flat part? Or wait, do you mean a 6 flat something? Like a flat 9? No, pineapple. Pineapple's pretty unmistakable, so it's a pineapple
I like that.
chord.
Well, it's like calling a Sears Roebuck Bridge, you know. Everyone knows what it is. It's easier than telling exactly what's happening in 10 seconds.
I'm curious, what is your Sears and Roebuck Bridge?
3-2-3-6-2-5.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I got Rhythm Bridge. Yeah.
And then the honeysuckle other than that, you know?
Yeah, that's basically our terminology, is a rhythm bridge, a honeysuckle bridge, sometimes like an exactly like you bridge if it's like a 4/4 minor one,
Yeah,
4/4 minor, that kind of thing. Yeah, but that pineapple chord, man, like, whoa.
Yeah.
That's got some, so yeah, like I just love the way that you know, since we're doing a lot of stuff that is improvised or at least partially improvised, that combination of like the familiar and expected, which gives you like a place to get comfortable, but then a lot like comedy, it's the setup that makes you think you know what's going to happen, but then it's the turn that then gives you the payoff. And if you're like just spouting non sequiturs that don't make sense, like there's no setup for the punchline to land. There's no context.
That's a great way to think about that. I thought relating jazz solos to comedy, but that makes total sense.
Well, otherwise, like, I mean, like there's a reason free jazz does not connect with as many people.
Yeah.
know?
That lack of familiarity is kills it.
Yeah, like was that a mistake? Was that a joke, or was that just what you had intended to do? Is that how it goes or not? I can't tell.
The joys of free jazz.
I mean, it's Sun Ra with two quartets playing completely independently of each other at the same time. Who knows? Yeah, and it's funny. Like intentionality is one of those things that is so important, and it's the thing that sometimes separates something that's trite from something that's sincere. And what I've learned about, you know, I had this like punk rock, alternative rock thing. I'm like, no, I'm going to be the real thing. I'm not going to be this corporate hair rock, Poison, Motley Crue bullshit. I'm going to be the punk rock, the second coming of Black Flag, motherfucker. Like that kind of.
This episode is definitely going to be explicit.
Oh no, I shouldn't have gone for the
mild mannered guitar player from California is the one getting the explicit.
That was a character I was doing. That was punk rock guy. Anyway, but like there's something that I realized that's more important than authenticity, which is what I was striving for, which is like I'm replicating this perfectly. It's sincerity and also like kind of gravitas. And when I mentioned Casey McGill, he's somebody that I didn't know personally and only knew of from this one kind of neo-swingish record that he had put out in the 90s that got a lot of play from people here in Los Angeles and swing dancers all over the country. And, you know, from what I have gathered and from what I believe he told me, you know, it got sort of produced away from him. Like he wrote it and recorded it, but then it got produced into this slightly more neo-swing direction, and he wasn't a fan of it. But I thought of him as this kind of cartoon character from this record. And then I got to work with him and got to know him. And I was like, oh no, this is somebody that like arranges Lester Young solos as solis in his big band. This is somebody that is so steeped in all of jazz history that he knows all of it. And he's just like this oracle and cipher of real jazz. And you're like, oh, okay, well, when he does a Cats and the Fiddle song, he actually knows it to do it right, as opposed to being a hack, which is what if anybody else did it, it would be too goofy. And that sort of intentionality and gravitas is so important. And and I'll give you one more secret that he told me. And I may be I feel like this is in my head on repeat. And so if I've sort of changed it, you know, the regeneration of the tape has caused some errors in the playback. I don't know. But I was like, I don't understand how you can sing some of these songs, and when you do it, it sounds right, and when somebody else does it, they sound like a hack. And I think I was mentioning something like Cab Calloway or something. And the trick he gave me was like, you do it at a 7. In your mind, they're at a 10, and when you do it at a 10, it's going to be overdone, and it's going to be too silly and too dramatic. Do it at a 7. And then it's like, it's wild, but it's not too wild. And just the idea of like, it's not as extreme as you think it is. And you're capable of going so much more extreme than the record is, or the thing that you're trying to do. So like, pull it back a notch. I was like, oh, okay. So like, I also play drums. And that's one thing that always helps me is when I do like when I'm going for like a ripping drum solo, not that I have the chops to really do it, but But when I'm like really need to kind of like make a moment happen, it's like, keep it at a 7, man. I mean, like throw down, but like, if you're going for a 10, you're going to start to like lose your technique, and it's going to like, and you're going to get sloppy, and it's going to go to hell. So yeah, do it at a 7. That's like such great advice.
I like that. Yeah, don't go all out. There's something
or just save a little bit in reserve, because if you're literally throwing everything you have at it, there's nothing left. And I find that's true of things like guitar action. Like, if your action is so high that you have to play so hard and clamp down so much, you're going to play like garbage because you literally have nothing left. There's no release valve. There's no buffer.
Right.
And so like I learned a lesson about 10 years ago that like my action was really unpleasantly high. And I thought that was me keeping it real. And it was like, oh no, that's one of the reasons why somebody like Eddie Lang or Lonnie Johnson or Eddie Durham sounds a little bit stilted in comparison to somebody like Carl Kress or Dick McDonough or then Charlie Christian. It's because according to the Ivor Morant's great jazz guitarist book, and he was a contemporary of Django in the 40s. He lived in London, and he owned one of the best music stores in London. It's still there. But I got this book, and one of the things he postulated was that the lowering of action and slightly lessening of string gauge. And we're talking about like, they say Eddie Lang played with 16s on top, and you know, that's very, very heavy. That like the next generation of people kind of lessened it a little bit and lowered the action a little bit, so they weren't having to like really hit that hard, and they could be more fluid. And it's the same thing. Like if you're really just like hitting everything as hard as you can all the time, it's too much. Oh, one other tip, and I think you'll get a kick out of this. This is another 90s kid reference. I remember reading this article, and this informs my arranging to this day. And it was Guitar Player magazine in 1992 or 1993, and Nine Inch Nails' Downward Spiral had just come out.
One of my favorite records of all time. I actually have to lay that out there for real.
Yeah, so good. I was a total goth industrial kid in late high school, so Ministry.
Me too.
Nine Inch Nails. All right. Well, we can. When we get off camera, we can talk about the singer in my high school rock band is still industrial, and I'd love to send you.
Mine too.
What band is he?
I'm sending you some music after this.
Oh, this is gonna be awesome. Yeah. No, my friend Eric's band, the band he was in before was called C. Colin Slash, which is the best DOS pun I think I've ever heard, because C. Colin Slash. Anyway. But Trent Reznor said one of the tricks to making this music sound so loud is that it's not loud all the time. And that if you scream and then you whisper and then you scream louder, that's so much more powerful than screaming and then just screaming louder, because it's all about the difference in the dynamics, not about the actual dynamic level. And especially the way mastering and compression kind of squashes everything in a way. It's all about those changes. And so like when I arrange a song with my band, or even in a chord melody arrangement, if I'm being clever, which is not often enough, putting an arc of dynamics in. And I joke that you can boil almost every one of my arrangements that I did for the Campus 5 down into 2. The medium, the slow and medium, and maybe medium fast start out like middle. They kind of peak about 3/4 of the way through, and then they come back home. And I call that a there and back. It's like, okay, we left the Shire, we went, and then we came back, but not like a crazy journey, just like pop out of the Shire and come back. And then the kind of the hotter tunes, they need a little bit more. And they kind of, especially for swing dancing, the faster a song is, the more dynamic it needs to be to justify people working that much harder to move to it. So usually start mezzo forte at least, and then kind of peak 2/3 of the way through. And then there'll always be a sort of like psych out, like, okay, piano solo, bass solo, and then come back up for the ending. And that differential in dynamics is what gives that ending so much more power, so that it doesn't need to be double forte. It doesn't need to be quadruple forte. Double forte just sounds epic after piano. So
yeah, that's the truth. Yeah, keeping that dynamic window open. That's what's so important, man.
Yeah.
Jonathan, do you think you can play us another tune?
Yeah. I'm gonna play you a tune that I wrote in captivity. and is sort of my little theme song for our great sequestration, where we're all sort of alone in our own homes. This is called All Cooped Up, and sort of inspired by stuff like that George M. Smith tune and Alan Roos, and sort of those guitar folio pieces that we can talk about maybe a little bit. And I just put up the sheet music to this, so if you want to learn it, it's on my Bandcamp store. So here's All Cooped Up.
Yeah, man, that was great. You mentioned a second ago about your Bandcamp, which is where you release all of your music, right? Is over on Bandcamp.
Yeah, I mean, luckily it's also available at iTunes and Amazon and all the places because we have digital distribution through CD Baby. But yeah, Bandcamp's the best because the money goes to me more. And I know all of you are so concerned about where my money goes, or where your money goes. But I mean, right now, especially when supporting artists is an important thing because we don't have gigs we can go play. There's no restaurant that is happy to throw us a couple bucks to go play in a corner for a couple hours right now. That's not happening. Being conscientious about sourcing your music so that the maximum benefit goes to it, that's really important. And so Bandcamp's really where that is. And so if you just look up my name on Bandcamp, there's my solo guitar CD, which is called Pick It and Play It. And also all of our swing dance music with the Campus 5. It's 4 albums over 18 years, 87 tracks. And then my solo guitar CD. But annoyingly, I have to have 2 separate artist listings because I own my solo guitar stuff, whereas I co-own the band with my singer.
Right.
And the accounting would just be too complicated to try and untangle them afterwards. So they're two separate listings, but on the just the solo guitar part of it, I also have the sheet music for there's two original songs on Pick It and Play It. So the sheet music in notes and tab is up there. And like I said, I just put up all Cooped Up there as well.
Cool. Yeah, Pick It and Play It came out last year, and I think it's probably one of the first like true chord melody solo records that's come out in quite a long time, at least that I'm familiar with. And so I remember when you started recording that, it was a good stir in the like trad guitar community there that this was happening, because it's almost a dying style to some extent, and it's also really nice personally to hear those songs recorded in such high fidelity. Where all the old records, you know, you can hear most of what's going on, but to hear it really like with new technology is pretty cool.
Yeah, well, so the funniest thing about recording that record is I made myself, as I'm on my way driving down to the studio, I'm listening to a playlist I'd made of like the greats, the Alan Roos, the Carl Kress, all this stuff. Yeah. And what I realized is almost none of them were 100% solo guitar.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And you're talking about it's those little breaks and stuff in tunes, and then you're going to make a how many track record on like just solo guitar.
Like I listened to all this Eddie Lang stuff, and it was like, oh no, that's Eddie Lang and a piano player. Oh, that's Carl Kress and Dick McDonough. Oh, that's like Dick Bernstein Ramble is I think is really George Van Epps and a bass player, or is that Dick Bernstein Ramble is supposedly by Dick McDonough, but I think it was actually by somebody else. And they found that out later. Dick Bernstein Ramble is, if you go YouTube it, it's like one of my favorite chord melody pieces that I don't know yet. But like that's a guitar and a bass. And so like I got there with this like creeping feeling of like, what have I tried to do? Like maybe this was stupid because it's too hard. And there's an element to the fact that like, improvised chord melody, completely solo guitar is maybe harder than it needs to be.
Yeah, definitely. It is.
but it's a good skill set. And what I loved is like, I mentioned the Masters of Plectrum Guitar book that Mel Bay put out many years ago, and I think it's still in print, or at least is still gettable. That was a whole bunch of things that were published. So things like the Carl Kress and Eddie Lang duets, or Carl Kress and Dick McDonough duets, some of those were published. Some of those Eddie Lang Giovannuti things were published, and maybe they're not exactly what's on the record, but it's pretty close. But there were people like Roy Smeck who wrote little guitar pieces, and there was this whole kind of literature coming from ragtime of set piece kind of chamber music for solo guitar that was reflecting the jazz harmony and jazz syncopation of the day, while not being improvised in the way that like jazz is. And so these pieces, like the four that are on Pick It and Play It, there's this Roy Smeck tune from 1928 that's sort of raggy. It sounds like so like it's got like chords interspersed with a lot of like rolling single notes. And then there's a piece from 1936 by Frank Victor, who was the guitar player for the Adrian Rollini trio. And it's like a chord piece like. So that's a bit of Pick It and Play It. And Pick It and Play It's specifically in the Masters of Plectrum Guitar book. But I came across the Alan Roos guitar folio, which is really hard to find. I found one on eBay. The only images of the cover of it I took and are just my scan of it, like copied over the internet, which I think is really funny. But it's 8 little solo guitar pieces that he did, and I've only learned 2 of them because like some of them are in these sharp keys that are like insane. It's like 5 sharps, and the accidentals, because it's all standard notation, and trying to figure out where you played it. So they're really hard to sort of like render if you don't have that exact skill set, though I obviously read music and had learned the two. But like one of the pieces he does was a little bit called Pet Shop, and it sounds like, oh, sorry, that was me starting to play my song, which I clearly sort of stole from Pet Shop. I just, I mean, because the thing is, like, these are all bits and pieces. It's all the same language. It's all the same sets of words and borrowed phrases. So, and because they're all in my mind and not me just reading music, it's so hard to like keep accessing the right folder. But and that kind of thing. So that tradition of these kind of like set pieces, Carl Kress's Sutton Mutton is something that I learned at some point, which sounds like, check this out. And what I've learned is that Carl Kress played in this crazy banjo tuning where he had a low B flat below the E on a guitar, and I think it was even higher high E. And what I learned is not only is he in fifths or some crazy tuning, so this guitar thing that I'd learned was obviously adapted to fit a standard guitar, but not only was it adapted, one of Carl Kress's middle strings was up an octave from what you would expect it to be. So he was able to get closer clusters that you couldn't possibly get. Now, because like this, like that's hard. And if it were in fifths, I think that would be even harder. That would be even a further spread, right?
Would actually. Speaking of the weird tunings of Carl Kress and such, right before the world started to fall apart, I was at Marty Grosz's 90th birthday party.
Oh, Marty!
And I mean, Marty's just a monster player, one of the best storytellers around, and he just brought this all-star band from New York and Philly. It was kind of like so many people he played with over the years. But one of the things I love watching about Marty play is because he plays in one of those weird tunings. So I'm like, life would be so much easier if I would bother to learn this. For the chord melody approach that he does to things, there are things that are just accessible to them that like you and I could not do on a standard 6-string guitar, which is a shame because you get that bigger spread, you know. But I mean, some of the tighter voicings can be tough to do. I mean, like a third looks like this, which is kind of tough. But those, and it's a shame because there's not really many videos of like Kress playing out there, right? So I mean, I can't think of any video of Carl Kress. I can't think of any video of Dick McDonough. There's none of Eddie. There's none. I mean, there's a little bit of Eddie Lang, but it's almost, I mean, that one, like it was from a movie or something, him and Venuti, right? Yeah. I mean, because you can listen to those records, but with no one else really playing those tunings anymore, like our ears just not familiar with it. You know, as a guitar player, you hear certain voicings and you know what it is because you played it a million times. But then we were listening to these awkwardly tuned guitars and some of those over chords. It's hard to pick out exactly like the voicings that are happening in there because it's so divergent from what we do now, what our ears are tuned to, for lack of a better term.
100%. And like, what a mystery it is for somebody like Carl Kress to be playing. And again, like I'm not the authority on Carl Kress, but I feel like somebody that knows told me one of the strings was up an octave. And maybe I'm wrong. And please, somebody double check me. Somebody call Marty Grosz right now and be like, but I feel like that's what it was.
We're gonna go knock on his door after this.
Yeah.
So he's like a mile away from me. I can do it.
Can you please stay away from the nonagenarians while we have a global pandemic going on? Would you please call them? Do not bring your germs over there. We need Marty Grosz. We lost Bucky. I'm not losing another one.
I know, man.
Yeah, no, I'm so bummed. I met Marty at a jazz festival that we were both playing at about 10 years ago, and I asked him for a lesson, and he just looked at me. He's like, "Well, do you play in this tuning?" Well, then what the hell am I going to give you? And he said no.
He's so yeah, I'm bummed actually. I've had 2 gigs now that I was called to sub bass for Marty over the years because he still does some local gigs in Philadelphia, and my buddy Joe is his main bass player. Both of them got snowed out 2 different years. So I still have yet to unfortunately play with Marty, which would be like a dream come true for me. He's been his repertoire and just everything that he does is just so phenomenal.
I have to say that is the fact that you also play bass is a really brilliant move. And I'll let you in on a little secret. It's impossible for a drummer to be on a gig with another drummer.
Yeah.
So like one of the things that I deal with is like the drummer in my band is this guy, Josh Colazzo. His day job is that he's the drummer in Edward Sharp. But,
cool.
For the last 20 years, he's been a swing dance drummer, and he's been Lindy hopping for 25 years. And I will gladly bet anybody dollars to donuts that he is the best living swing drummer, and that if there's anybody that's a better drummer, that they don't play swing music properly. And if there's anybody that's more swing, he actually has better chops and better ears. And which is crazy because usually people with the best ears don't have the best chops, and he's got both. And he's literally amazing. And we deal with this thing where like, when he's not available, it's like catastrophic.
Yeah. I know the feeling.
Yeah. And the best person that I've ever found to replace him that gets what our songs are supposed to, what's supposed to happen in our songs, is a guy that plays bass and many other instruments, and has done many gigs with Josh in this band just on another instrument.
Yeah.
And he can watch and appreciate because and see that, whereas like if you're just the sub bass player, you never know what the regular bass player does.
No.
And with guitar players, like I'm not on guitar gigs that often with another guitar player. And so like if I wanted to like go see Marty Grosz, the best way to do it would be to be a bass player and just to watch from there. And then you get to participate. And obviously you got to worry about playing bass, but that's true for several people that I know that are really great string players. Makia Matsuda, who is a leader of the Alcatraz Islanders in San Francisco. He's just a transcendently good Hawaiian, steel player. But he also plays bass, and he plays fantastic bass. And he plays with my friend Nick Rossi in San Francisco a bunch. And then there's a guy also in San Francisco, Vic Wong, who's a great, chord melody and Manouche style guitar player, but who also plays bass. And I feel like there's a really nice perspective you get from being on a gig with, especially like a great like Marty Grosz.
Yeah.
Sorry, it didn't actually happen.
I know. Well, hey, there's still time. Yeah, the odd thing for me is upright bass is my primary instrument, which actually a lot of people listening probably don't know that that's what I studied in university, which was bass.
Oh man.
Transitioned to uke and guitar much later than that. But finding a bass player for my own band was one of the toughest things I've ever done in my life, because as you're talking about, just like bop and post bop is like the training jazz bass players get these days. I'm like, can you just play root and fifth, man? Like, that's so hard. But then you can't hire like someone from the bluegrass scene. No offense to bluegrass people, but there's some tuning issues generally. But it does. I have found actually picking up uke later on as kind of my main chord instrument. Actually, even before bass, I'm a reformed clarinetist. So I've kind of like gone the spectrum a little bit, but playing guitar, uke, and bass, like all of them help the other ones so much. Because when I'm playing uke, I play drop voices 90% of the times. I don't have a root in there. I'm playing only extensions sometimes, but I could think about it in my head as to what the bass line is to go along with that and why it's working in the justification. The same thing on guitar when I'm doing, the chord melody stuff, that you have a different understanding of the bass movement in it. And then if you're as a guitarist on a gig with another bass player, you know how to stay the heck out of their way, which is another problem sometimes, which, guitar players are better than pianists at that.
I wish I knew how to play bass, because I sometimes think about like writing bass lines just like when I'm doing like a big band arrangement and just throwing in a bass line so I can hear how things sound. And I have no imagination when it comes to playing bass other than root fifth. And that sounds stupid to me when it's not swinging, because it's MIDI playing it back.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a way to make that swing, I've got this thing.
Not with a computer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've got this kind of very like, my punk rock, alternative rock, real deal authenticity nerd thing. it's almost evangelical in the way that like, I'm like, no. And it's the same way my mother is about Italian things. It's like, no, this is the right way to do it. And there's someone wrong on the internet. I have to stop them.
Yes.
But like when I play rhythm guitar, there's a lot of books that talk about like Freddie Green style rhythm guitar. I mean, there's a lot of books where they talk about the time feel being, and I was like, well, no, it's actually,
yeah.
And it's actually really hard to discern that unless you've done some research, because a lot of times there are recordings where either the bass blends in with 1 and 3 or the hi-hat blends in with 2 and 4 that gives a false impression. But if you can really listen for a second and just hear the guitar, so often it's just short, fat quarter notes.
Yeah.
And so it amazes me the fact that dump, 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 there's a way to do that and still have it swing.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting the quarter note to swing. I mean, that's everything, isn't it? Because when you have that, you have the rhythm section going, because you got the ride, the bass, and the guitar. But with that also, Freddie Green's voicings, you see a lot of them taught as much larger voicings than Freddie would use as well, which always gets me. He was such a minimalist in his like harmonic approach, but some really cool stuff going on.
But I also think like Freddie Green is one of those things where he had a 50-year career.
Yeah.
He died in 1987 and he joined the Count Basie band, which he did not leave before he died in 1937.
Hey, a good gig's a good gig.
Boy, the stories. There's the famous story that like in 1950, Basie disbanded and started a septet with 3 horns and no guitar. And the second week of the gig, Basie shows up and there's Freddie Green with his guitar opening up his case. And they called him Pep for salt and pepper hair because he was starting to go gray at that point. And so he walks over to him. He's like, hey, Pep, are you on this gig? And he's like, well, you playing, ain't you? I gave you the best years of my life. You think you're leaving me now? And so he never left after that. I mean, like, that makes me
like him even more.
I think I'm repeating that story more or less as it appears in Jazz Anecdotes, the book. But I'm sure I've personalized that in some way and added an accent, which is probably not exactly correct. But so Freddie Year has this 50-year history. And so like, I only actually care about Freddie Green, 1937 to 1947.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people think of him, is that those early years.
Well, I mean, not to be contrary, but I actually think most people don't even, most guitar players, when they think of Count Basie and stuff, they don't think of swing era Count Basie. They think of 50s Count Basie, Frank Sinatra Count Basie, Live at the Sands.
Yeah.
And especially because like so many jazz players have that high school jazz band experience where they're playing a Sammy Nestico chart, like Basie Straight Ahead or something. And like, to me, even if they're playing Jumpin' at the Woodside or 1 O'Clock Jump, the way they do it in 1957 is just an entirely different experience. And
Definitely.
like all of the literature, like the Charlton Johnston book on swing and big band rhythm guitar, which I think for the voicings is one of the best resources for that style of rhythm guitar. But the time feel is chew, chit, chew, chit, chew. And that's like, nope. Maybe
it's almost like this La Pompe sort of thing that people have prescribed to it, which is weird.
But they're, we'll get into backbeats in a second, because I actually think that's a really huge, important time feel lesson that I learned. But the way that like Freddie was starting to drop from 3 notes to like 2 and then to 1, where he's almost walking a tenor line over the bass. I think that's a much later invention. So for the swing era stuff, I don't do that as much. But the funny thing is, I played with this, my friend Brooks Prumo, who's a swing dancer and guitar player out of Austin, Texas. And he's now a band leader and has a big band. But he's like 100% Freddie Green all the time. Like, he doesn't do chord solos. He's got a lore and his action is like so high. And I'm like, wait a second, how does your like lore, like, modern factory made lore sound that much louder than my 1939 L5? That's like the loudest guitar I know. And it's just because his action's screaming high, and he's only having to play those 2-note voicings.
Yeah.
We were on a recording session gig for Michael Gamble where he was playing, where Brooks was playing rhythm guitar and I was playing just electric, sort of in a Charlie and Freddie kind of role division. And watching him, hearing him kind of like be like, and I was like, oh, that is pretty cool.
It's
and
such
so,
a beautiful thing. So
yeah.
it's so like sounds so simple, but there's like so much actually going on there. It's the crazy thing.
Well, and also like just even when I'm not walking it, the idea of dropping the low E, it really allowed the D and G strings to project more and allowed me to cut through better. And so at this point, when I'm playing rhythm guitar in a band, I'm pretty much not playing the low E at all. Mm-hmm. And I still have like a vestigial voicing where like I may be fretting the low E string, but it's sort of muted.
Yeah.
But at this point, I've started to develop some voicings that are 2-note specific. So like I might do like, so like stuff like that. And yeah, it's interesting. Like the more active you are, the more you got to worry that you're interfering with something or staying out of the way.
Yeah.
And I found that, so one of the projects that I'm involved in with my big band is we do an event called Lindy Focus, and they started doing this thing 3 years ago. The basic premise of the event, at least in the last 7 years in its modern incarnation, is it's a 5-night swing dance event with all of the same people there all 5 nights. It's the 5 nights leading up to New Year's Eve, and it's in Asheville, North Carolina. And they were like, you know what, instead of Voltroning together 2 small bands into a big band at the end of the weekend, why don't we just do like a full big band 5 nights in a row? And how are you going to play 30 songs a night of a full big band without repeats and all this stuff? And we figured out that, okay, what if we do each night dedicated to a historical band leader? And that way, like, you could do like a whole night of Benny Goodman, a whole night of Count Basie. Like, that would just make so much more thematic sense.
Yeah.
5 nights of a different big band set, you know, each night. And we're talking 3 sets. So that's like 150 songs. After the first 2 years, because it was really easy. It was like, okay, well, the big 4 is obvious. Basie, Duke, Goodman, Shaw. But we were looking for a 5th, and the only one you could actually get charts for that you could do 30 songs from would be Glenn Miller, and that's kind of not hip enough for the swing crowd most of the time. And that band could really burn Miller, but like the material that was published or that you can get is usually the more square stuff or the more kind of pop stuff. But we decided, okay, well, New Year's Eve, we'll just do Kitchen Sink Night, and that'll be the release valve from all of this artifice. And after 2 years of doing that and honing the second year, we're like, okay, well, it's not enough to just do that a 3rd time. We need to introduce something new. We can't they don't exist to get charts for another band. Why don't we crowdfund the Lindy Hop community? And so they raised $27,000 and transcribed 34 Chick Webb songs, basically from scratch by really known transcribers that are authorities in the era. And so that project then became, okay, the next year we're going to do 30 Jimmy Lunsford songs. Okay, the next year we're going to do 30 Lionel Hampton songs. And each one of those band leaders, and even the big 4, their band leading style is so different, and the arranging styles is so different. And even the way that the same arranger wrote for a different band, the way Eddie Durham wrote for Basie versus wrote for Lunsford, it's really fascinating. And each night, even though it's the same 14 to 17 people playing all of those notes, we all inflect them differently because that's just the way those songs go. What I learned about rhythm guitar, that was all a giant digression. So I could tell you about when I'm playing Chick Webb, walking doesn't work. You can't walk rhythm guitar. You just need to sit there and go. You can't be like you'd think that like when I'm playing the same time feel, but that like additional information doesn't jive. But then when I'm playing in Basie night, that sounds fine. That sounds great.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really fascinating to play through all of that historic material, and get to try it on and be like, nope, skinny pants not for me.
Skinny pants only work in certain contexts. That's
and
reality.
My body shape is not one of them.
Jonathan, with that, do you think you could play us one last tune?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I just want to tell you, man, this is super fun. So I'm having a ball.
Me too.
Let's do something. Let's do something a little pretty. I'll just play the head on this, but here's a little bit of body and soul.
Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today.
You gotta leave
just missed that will be cut out of this.
You gotta leave that was some cat related content, and there is a constituency in the swing dance community that might watch this called Cat Squad. They literally have a name, Cat Squad. It is cat related. It is germane to them, and they want to see that cat walking.
Yeah, I have failed at my mission. My fluffy son Charlie I have this 6-foot window in the front of my house, which I'm right next to, and he will climb all the way up the screen, and then stick his head through the blinds like this and yell at me for 5 minutes if I don't remove him. He's an interesting fellow. Yeah, look what I can do. Look what I can do. So cats. But John, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you taking all this time, and I'm going to try my best to link to everything we talked about, including a lot of those old recordings that we talked about, so people can check those out. And I'm really hoping we get the swing dance community back going soon, and so we can all play some music and play some dances.
Looking forward to it. Yeah, seriously.
All right, would you mind playing us a little bit of music out?
Yeah, sounds good. Here's Count Basie's Jive at 5.